Most people think the petrodollar is a finance term. I think that is already the first mistake, because when people hear a word like that, they imagine economists, central bankers, bond traders, currency charts, and men in dark suits talking in polite language no normal person wants to hear. That is not how I see it. I see the petrodollar as one of the most powerful political inventions of the modern age. I see it as the mechanism that helped America turn a currency into a necessity. And once you understand that, you stop reading the last 50 years as a random sequence of oil shocks, wars, sanctions, debt explosions, and diplomatic pressure. You start seeing the architecture underneath. That is the story I want to tell, because I do not think the real question is what the petrodollar is. The real question is how the United States managed to persuade, pressure, and position the entire world into needing its paper in order to buy the fuel of industrial civilization. That is a very different question, and it has a very different answer. Let me start with something simple. Oil is not merely one commodity among many. Oil is movement, oil is aviation, oil is shipping, oil is trucking, oil is fertilizers, oil is plastics, oil is military logistics, oil is supply chains. Oil is the hidden force sitting inside the ordinary life people mistake for normal. A grocery shelf does not look like oil. An airport terminal does not look like oil. A farm does not look like oil. A hospital does not look like oil. But if you pull the energy thread, honestly, oil is there, often quietly, often invisibly, doing the work that allows modern society to pretend it is running on convenience instead of extraction. So the first thing to understand is this: if you sit near the pricing, settlement, and financing center of oil, you are not merely near one market, you are near the bloodstream. Now, before we get to how the dollar attached itself to that bloodstream, we have to go back to the period when the dollar did not need oil in quite the same way. After the Second World War, the United States stood in a position most powers only dream about. Much of the world was damaged. America was not. It had industrial strength, huge economic scale, credibility, gold reserves, and the political leverage to help design the post-war order. That was the environment in which Bretton Woods was born. The dollar became the center of the system, and the dollar was tied to gold. That detail matters because gold was not just a metal in a vault. Gold was discipline. Gold was the part of the arrangement that told the world there was still some visible restraint on the issuer of the reserve currency. Then came 1971. Nixon broke the dollar S link to gold. A lot of people treat that like a technical adjustment. I do not. I think it was one of the great strategic danger points in the entire American century. Because the moment the dollar was no longer exchangeable for gold, the natural question became obvious. Why should the world keep treating this currency as special? Not strong, special. There's a difference. A strong currency can be admired. A special currency is required, and if you are the United States, admired is good, but required is much better. So when I look at the next chapter, I do not see a random historical sequence. I see a search for a new anchor. Gold was gone. Something else had to do the disciplining work that gold used to do. Something else had to make the world keep coming back. That something was oil. Then the 1973 oil crisis made the strategic importance of oil impossible for anyone to ignore. Supply disruption hit the West. Prices exploded, inflation spread. Shortages created fear. And in that environment, America reached a deal with Saudi Arabia, the central player in global oil production. The essence of the arrangement was simple. Saudi Arabia would price its oil in dollars. America would provide protection and support. And once the largest producer in the room accepted that structure, others had very strong reasons to live inside it too. That is the point where many explanations stop. They say, there you go, oil was sold in dollars, so the petrodollar was born. Technically, yes, but that explanation is too thin for me. The deeper point is that America found a way to replace an old monetary anchor with a new demand machine under the gold system. The world needed dollars because dollars had a formal relationship to gold. Under the petrodollar system, the world needed dollars because dollars had a functional relationship to energy. That is a profoundly different kind of power. Gold says your currency is constrained. Oil says your currency is needed. And for a reserve issuer, needed is a beautiful word. Now think like a country that imports energy. You may dislike Washington. You may distrust American foreign policy. You may resent American influence. None of that changes the fact that if the fuel running your economy is settled in dollars, you need dollar reserves, dollar access, dollar liquidity, and a financial system able to absorb that dependence without breaking. So the petrodollar did not merely support the dollar. It manufactured structural demand for the dollar. And once that demand became permanent, the benefits multiplied. A world that must hold dollars helps keep the dollar strong. A world that saves in dollars helps finance American deficits. A world that recycles oil revenues back into American assets helps deepen American financial markets. A world that settles major transactions through dollar plumbing gives Washington enormous visibility and leverage. This is where I think many people still fail to see the full picture, They imagine the petrodollar as a pricing convention. I think that is far too polite. It was an ecosystem. First, countries needed dollars to buy oil. Second, oil producers received dollars. Third, those producers often invested those dollars into U.S. Treasury bonds, American companies, real estate, and broader dollar assets. Fourth, that recycled flow reinforced the financial center that had created the demand in the first place. That is not just trade. That is a loop, a very elegant one, and elegant loops are hard to break because every participant is responding to incentives that feel rational at the local level, even when the system as a whole produces dependency. This is why I say the petrodollar is one of the great control systems of modern power, not because somebody in a secret room controls every event. I do not believe serious power works that way. I believe serious power works through systems that reward certain choices so consistently that the world begins to call those choices natural. That is the real trick when dependence becomes normal. The architecture disappears from view. Now, if you are the United States, what does such a system buy you? It buys you cheaper borrowing than most countries can dream of. It buys you wider tolerance for deficits. It buys you deeper capital markets because so much of the world is funneling savings toward your financial center. It buys you sanctions power because the plumbing matters as much as the transaction. And it buys you geopolitical reach because financial dependence is often a softer, more durable form of power than military occupation. That is why I always tell people this. A country does not need to occupy your capital to shape your choices. If it sits at the center of the currency, settlement, and reserve structure your economy depends on, it already has one hand on your options. Now, none of this means the system is eternal. People have been trying to loosen it for years. Russia has tried to reduce its dollar use. China has promoted yuan. Denominated contracts, countries under sanctions have every reason to search for alternatives. The BRICS countries talk openly about reducing dependence on the dollar. And I take all of that seriously, but I also think many critics underestimate how sticky a mature system becomes once enough contracts, hedging practices, legal frameworks, insurers, banks, reserve managers, traders, and state institutions have built themselves around it. It is easy to declare rebellion. It is much harder to rebuild the pipes. That is why I never confuse frustration with replacement. The world may want alternatives. That does not mean the world can adopt them cleanly. If you suddenly move oil trade into another currency, you are not merely swapping units of account. You are disturbing liquidity. You are disturbing contracts. You are disturbing settlement habits. You are disturbing legal expectations. You are disturbing insurance structures. You are disturbing the very depth that allows large transactions to happen without panic. That is why countries hostile to the United States still often use the dollar when it is convenient and only reduce its use selectively when politics forces them to. They do not live outside the system. They manage their exposure to it. There is a difference, and that difference tells you how strong the architecture still is. I sometimes explain it this way. The petrodollar was not magic. It was leverage built on necessity. America did not make oil important. Industrial civilization did that. America did not invent the world. A nation for energy. Modern life did that. What America did do very successfully was place its currency close enough to that need that every barrel helped reinforce American monetary centrality. That is a strategic achievement. You may admire it. You may resent it, but you should at least understand it because people who do not understand it tend to say foolish things. They say America is powerful because it has the biggest military. That is only part of the answer. They say America is powerful because people trust it. Also only part of the answer. The fuller answer is that America managed to embed itself inside the daily operating requirements of the global economy. That kind of power is quieter, and quiet power usually lasts longer than loud power. Now, let me say something that matters to investors, citizens, and anybody who wants to think clearly. Whenever a system becomes this central, people eventually start assuming it is natural law. It is not. It is history made durable, and anything made by history can be changed by history slowly, unevenly, and with tremendous friction, yes, but not impossibly. That is why the future question matters. Can the petrodollar weaken? Of course it can. Can parts of the world trade more in yuan, euros, local currencies, or some future mechanism not yet fully visible? Of course they can. But the real test is not whether somebody can announce an alternative. The real test is whether that alternative can match the combination of liquidity, scale, habit, legal depth, and global acceptance that made the dollar system so resilient in the first place. That is the mountain, not slogans, not conferences, not resentment. Infrastructure. And until that rival infrastructure is real, broad, deep, and trusted under stress, the dollar remains much harder to dislodge than many angry governments would like to admit. So when I look back at the petrodollar, I do not just see an oil arrangement. I see the moment America found a way to turn the world's energy dependence into recurring demand for its currency. I see the moment paper recovered its throne after gold stopped protecting it. I see the moment a reserve currency stopped being merely prestigious and became operationally unavoidable. And I see why so many countries spend years criticizing the system while continuing to feed it. That is not hypocrisy. That is structure. And structure is what serious people should always study first. Because once you understand the structure, the headlines become easier to interpret, the moral speeches become easier to discount, and the difference between symbolic defiance and real power becomes much easier to see. That is why I say this as plainly as I can. If you do not understand the petrodollar, you do not understand how the modern world was wired. And if you do not understand how the world was wired, you will keep mistaking the lights for the electricity.